Good morning. It is Monday, November 6th. This is First Things at First Pres. Going to talk this morning about issue 1 that is in front of us on the Ohio ballot, which we'll be voting on tomorrow. So hopefully you'll follow this link in time and have the ability to look at this. I've talked about abortion before. I've preached on it. You can go back to Facebook. I think it's June of 2022, 21. When 222, I think. But when the the Sunday after the Supreme Court decision dropped, I preached a sermon on that and and got a little pushback. Not bad. It was just more lighthearted. But I did say that it was an act of judicial cowardice, and I stand by that. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Really want to look at the ballot. That's what you're going to look at tomorrow. And if you're watching this, I want you to get right to it. The whole premise behind doing these videos, First Things at First Pres, is to help you think theologically about issues, not just merely culturally or ideologically or politically, but theologically. How do we as Christians think through the fullness of the issue? And I'll get down to some of that down the road, after I talk about the ballot issue. If you want to hang in there, we can talk more about some of the issues attendant to this. But, I think we understand the reason this issue is the reason that there's even a risk of this ballot issue passing is because of fear mongering and how complicated the issue of abortion is. And what I mean by this is state issue 1 is extraordinarily extreme in what it would permit. And I would say this, and just listening and watching some of the advertisements, it's amazing. My Hulu, as I'm watching some TV, it's giving me pro issue 1 ads every night. So I'm listening to what they're saying, and they're saying if you don't vote for this, all of this boogeyman stuff is going to happen, which is not true. I mean, let's just start by talking about the politics of abortion in the United States. And just like you're going to find, one up until, I don't know, it was 10 years ago, one of the last nations Western nations to allow for legal abortion was Ireland. Not a surprise, right? Very staunch Roman Catholic country. But they finally did. And by the way, most of the world has a 12 to 15 week window where they permit abortion to occur. Ireland took forever to do this, but they eventually did because of how many women are in their population and how many women, and not just women, men want that available. So understand that abortion is the politics and the money for abortion are in the hands of the extreme ends. And so you've got Planned Parenthood. We've got all these, and understand, but also Google this, Planned Parenthood and biotech, embryo harvesting. Right now there's real money in the harvesting of fetal organs. And we're talking about fully developed lungs, livers, kidneys, brains, if you can harvest them. You're looking at why are so many states, there was not a ballot initiative. There was a movement where Virginia, I think it was overruled, but Virginia was looking to do what New York and California do, which is right now, if a baby is born and the intent of the mother was an abortion, they still kill the baby. You look at why anyone would want to push that. Well, there are certain, not all biotech, but there is a certain wing of biotech that's all into fetal embryo research. And by the way, that whole biotech industry, understand when it comes to fetal parts, there are, what you'd call 3 degrees of separation. Is there are multinational corporations, pharmaceutical industries, et cetera, they all want access to fetal tissue, fetal baby parts, everything for testing and research and for all the whole host of biological development. That's why I say there's huge money, but it's dirty business in the United States. So it's at the ground level, you have to have these kind of third parties, independent biotech firms that do harvesting. And then you have, the butcher industry, the butcher meat market, which is Planned Parenthood. And that's, the ground level is Planned Parenthood's the bloody place. They're the ones that will broker all of these deals as the blood is dripping from the embryos. And I'm not a fan of Planned Parenthood because of that. They make money. They make money value. You can go look at what the chart is. Technically, according to the law, they're only allowed to charge what it costs, their cost to harvest. But, it's a game. As long as you don't go extravagant, as long as you don't try to really create a market for it. So you say, oh, well, it's more difficult to harvest a liver than a lung. It's more difficult to harvest a fully intact organ than tissue. And all of that makes sense. And so there's that scale, but they're making money off of dead babies, which, by the way, why they're not turning around and giving that money to the women who are coming in there is an ethical question that no one is on that pro-abortion side is asking. So you've got the meat market, which is Planned Parenthood. You've got the entry level, the ground level biotech firm. So you'll get a biotech firm that comes in and partners with the butcher industry, and they'll procure their parts, their organs from the local clinic, and then what happens there is where the whole game starts to be played. What happens to the tissue? What happens to those organs? Where is it being allocated, right? United States, the biotech industry is a lot more complicated than China, for example, or North Korea, where they can practice, they can do whatever they want to. As far as fetal procurement. And that's kind of you're talking about, make no mistake, we're seeing this with some of the stuff that's come out from Fauci and COVID and some of these weapons. You look at why is the United States partnering in a biotech lab in Wuhan, China, or anywhere in China? Well, it's because China can get away with ethical lapses that would be, if word got out in the United States what kind of experiments they were doing, we would be horrified by that. So understand that there is this issue. When we're talking about who is funding issue one, we're talking about Planned Parenthood, biotech firms, lots of money. And this is all available, by the way, if you just Google it. There is big money at the heart of this. Everyone thinks that this is about the well-being or the health of the mother, is sadly mistaken. Again, I'll use an example right in the news with Britney Spears saying in her memoir that she felt pressured into her abortion. Well, at no point along the line did the abortion provider or anyone counsel her and say, do you really want to go through with this? At every step along the line, it was like, okay, let's just get this done. And now here she is, a grown woman, 30 years after the fact, 20 years after the fact, still dealing with guilt and trauma over this decision that she felt coerced into, or at least pressured into, may be the fair word there. So issue one is a problem, and it's extreme for a few reasons. The biggest one is the issue of who makes the determination about when it would be inappropriate. This is what we're talking about. So the issue becomes, okay, they're trying to say, if you don't pass this, it's handmaiden's tale. A woman's never going to have an abortion. And what I was trying to say is, no, at some level in a democratic country, pro-lifers are going to lose, and no limit abortion folks are going to lose, because the statistics don't lie. Even among Christians, when they get polled, you still find that especially at the early stage of abortion, whether it's right or not, the majority of Americans want some form of abortion to be legalized. Now, I'm a pastor, and I'm fine saying to people that sometimes I feel like being a Christian is daring the country to take your vote away from you, because again, I wrestle with compassion a lot, but I cannot wrestle with the idea of life beginning at conception and having dignity and inherent worth, because It's that life itself is germinated by God Himself. And I'm talking about life in the grand scheme of things, the spark of life that underlies everything. We can talk about the biology of the sperm and the egg meeting and the fireworks starting and creating this new life. But even then, it's rather extraordinary when you think about, here are two cellular kinds of creatures, right? An egg and a sperm, and they sit in two different bodies, for years and years. For sperm, they're generated more on the spot, but a woman's born with all of her eggs, and these things just sit there, and they've got life to them, but there's something extraordinary happens that in that moment where you talk about just potential. In that moment of conception, you can see, when that sperm and egg become that embryo, you can unpack that DNA and the genetic signature of that being right there. It's human. That's the silliness of the argument. It is a unique human being at the moment of conception. And we know this now with DNA, right? You can tell at the moment of conception what its skin color is going to be, what its eye color, hair color, how tall, how short. You can check propensity towards cancers. There's so much that can happen there. And yet we want to play these semantic word games, fetus, zygote, embryo, baby. All of these things are silly little word games that help us to take one level away from moral culpability. But make no mistake, issue 1. So this is about issue 1, right? So the issue here is who makes the final determination about when abortion is too late, right? Because this is what issue 1 proponents are saying. Hey, if you don't pass this, then you're never going to have the right to an abortion. Well, understand that issue 1 is not merely a law. You can't go back to just put pressure on your state representative or your state senator. This is going to be enshrined as a constitutional amendment, which is going to take the same extraordinary lengths to remove it. And what it would say in the Constitution is that the one who makes the decision, the professional judgment of the pregnant patient's treating physician. So what are we talking about? It's not it's not a medical board. It's not an OBGYN in the vast, vast majority of cases. We're saying the abortionist, the abortion doctor, the butcher who is the one who that's their job, is destroying babies day in and day out for profit. They're the ones that get to make the decision on whether or not the mother, they need to protect the pregnant patient's life or health. And what's the standard of life and health? That's we're not talking about physical, right? We're also talking about mental well-being, which is the semantic word game that you can allow anything to happen. So understand that we allow the foxes, literally the foxes, the predator, to make the determination on whether or not the prey is fair game or not. It's letting the hunter decide what the hunter season is going to be. It's letting the one who has the most to gain make the decision on whether they're going to deny themselves profit. It just seems that this would be as extreme as you can imagine. Because you're going to have, you go, let's talk worst case scenario, because we've seen worst case scenario. Again, if you haven't watched the movie out with Kermit Gosnell or Googled Kermit Gosnell, do it. This is an abortion provider that had very low standards as far as cleanliness and sanitariness goes. He had disposed embryo and embryo parts all over his clinic, right? This was a man that ended up being convicted for the just not only how poorly he treated babies, but how badly he treated the women that were coming in there. And he would have assuming he didn't go to jail, he would be the one making the determination on a case-by-case basis of his patients. And again, not a board. It would be each professional judgment of the abortionist as to whether or not the baby could be aborted or not. And here we see, fetal viability. This is section C. So section B of it's Article 1, Section 22, the right to reproductive freedom. Article B is the one that says, in no case, so again, here's the black and white language, in no case may such an abortion be prohibited if in the professional judgment of the pregnant patient's treating physician, it is necessary to protect the pregnant patient's life or health. So, as I just said, the professional judgment is who is the pregnant patient's treating physician in the instance of abortion. In the vast majority of cases, it's not an OBGYN. Remember this. This is why abortion will always be legal in every state, because even there's no religious objections to abortions provided when the physical life of the mother is in jeopardy. That's always been a standard of care. And there are cases where you have legitimate OBGYNs performing abortions in hospital settings because you have that either or case. Either this baby's going to be born and it may be born alive and healthy and vibrant, or it might be born disabled and having issues there. But either way, either this baby's coming in and the mother's dying, or the mother's dying and the baby's coming in. And we've seen this, right? There was a case not too long ago of a woman that was diagnosed with cancer. And she was pregnant at the same time she was diagnosed, and rather than undergoing treatments, she wanted to bring that baby. That was the either or. We can give you chemo and radiation and all these treatments to give you life, and you can get pregnant again in the future, or you can, and that would mean you'd have to necessarily abort your baby, or you can't have any treatments, and you have to bring this baby to term, in which case the likelihood of your survival plummets. And that's what the woman chose. She chose to keep the pregnancy. And that's really, you talk about choice. That was really a hard choice right there. It was choosing her health over the health of her babies. And she chose her baby's well-being over her own. But that's why I just want to say, with all these extremist arguments out there, there will always be rare cases where pregnancies become terminal, either for the baby or for the mother. And in that case, there's not a church teaching that you can find. There's not a church you can find that would say in that case that a mother must die for the sake of the baby. That's I'm not going to say there's a knucklehead out there that doesn't hold to that, but it would be a fringe. You got snake handlers holding poisonous snakes, believing Jesus is going to save them from being bit. Morons. You're going to find that anywhere. But when it comes to the church, I'm talking about the historic church, you're not going to find a church that objects to the issue of aborting a baby if and when the physical life of the mother is at stake. So this is why I say occasionally you will find a legit OBGYN who will do this. But by and large, the vast majority of abortions are performed by abortion-providing doctors, meaning that's all they do. That's why I call them butchers. That they spend their entire day, every day, dismembering. And again, it sounds maybe harsh, but go and Google a D&E, dilation and extraction. Look at actually what is occurring here. And again, more and more of these kinds of abortions are being done because more and more surgeries are being performed. Let's be honest here about when I talk about the biotech industry, that subsect of biotech looking at fetal parts, understand what is being demanded of abortion doctors, and it's requiring a higher level of skill and precision on their parts. Abortion butchers are getting better at what they're doing because the market there's money to be made in procuring fully intact, fully formed organs. And that means that again, this is the stuff that just goes to without, that people don't want to talk about. But what, babies are not being given, if a doctor was to give a baby pain relief, there would be an affirmation of its humanity, right? So when we're talking about, and we are talking here about, again, we're talking about this issue. We're not talking about 6-week abortions. We're not talking about 12-week abortions. There is debate at 12 plus weeks about when pain sensation forms. And again, there's a whole debate about what pain means. And it just seems silly that we're having those kind of conversations. But those conversations are being had. You know, regardless of what we're saying here, the real issue becomes this issue of no limit on abortion. And issue one is not talking about a 12-week or a 15-week or even a 20-week or even a third trimester ban on abortion. It's talking about when, in the eyes of the abortion provider, they believe that the woman it's no longer in the woman's best interest. And I'm saying that is an inherent conflict of interest. We're not talking about abortive physicians. We're not talking about an OBGYN whose practice is typically the delivering of helping a pregnant woman bring a healthy baby with a healthy mother to completion, a delivery of a healthy delivery of a healthy baby. And an OBGYN sees the good, the bad, and all of that cycle. And that would include babies with deformations. That would include babies with medical issues. That would include complications that are unforeseen by pregnant women, all that kind of stuff. But it's sort of circle of life. They get the joy of delivery and seeing that happy family, as well as the complications and the negative side of that. But the vast majority, as I said, of abortions are being performed in abortion clinics by abortion doctors whose livelihood, that's how they make their money, is killing babies. And you're asking them, and that's why I say it's the fox in the hen house. It's literally the predator making decisions regarding the prey of its own and saying, what limitations do you want to place upon yourself? And keeping in mind here also with the politics of the issue is understanding that, hey, what happens if you're in that business and you decide to say, hey, look, I'm not going to do organ procurement. I'm not going to do third trimester. I'm not going to do partial birth. The industry itself would push against that because they all for one for all, right? And we see, as I said before, look up, Gosnell, the horrific kind of stuff that he did, and he would be the one making the determination of fetal viability and the best case health. And again, fetal viability. I want to hit this. Section C of this issue says fetal viability means the point in a pregnancy when, in the professional judgment of the pregnant patient's treating physician, the fetus has a significant likelihood of survival outside the uterus with reasonable measures. This is determined on a case-by-case basis. So here again, notice the language of case-by-case. So no limitations, no saying no limit on partial birth, no saying no limit on third trimester, no limit on 20 weeks, 15 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 weeks. This is every fetus is decided on its viability on a case-by-case basis. But who is making that decision again? It's not a medical board. It's not an organization of physicians. It is an organization of abortion doctors. The very ones, it's the treating, and not even a board of abortion providing doctors. This is the doctor that this woman is seeing at that moment. And you got to ask yourself, what kind of limitations are going to be put on here? So the very people that are most stridently for no limit abortions are the ones that get to decide the limits on abortion. So there won't be. And that's why I say at the end of this, if this passes, you will have a disaster in our Constitution. You will have any abortion allowed for any reason because the people that make the decision will be the people that'll be the farthest on the left issue on this. Not just your pro-lifers, not just your pro-feminist, pro-choice people. You're talking about the industry itself, and it's embedded in the language here. The people that get to decide what the limits are on an abortion are the patient, the doctor providing the treatment to the woman. And that's what I mean is it notes, no, there can't be any generalization here. It is the treating physician to the mother that is presenting for the abortion. That's the one. Not the mother gets to make the decision. Not the organization even Planned Parenthood, which decide how they'd handle that. But even if let's say you're at a Planned Parenthood clinic and they have 4 doctors working in that clinic, it is up to that one doctor with that one patient to decide what the limits are. Again, that goes back to this idea that the person in the least capable sense, the one that's making the most amount of money, is the one that gets to decide when they're limited and what they can do. And that just belies itself. You know exactly what's going to happen here. So that's why I say look at the end of the day, and at the end of the day, what happens if the worst case scenario gets passed here? Well, it's just sort of like with Roe v. Wade or anything else. Infanticide and the murder of babies is an ancient evil. You go back to Molech and Chemosh in the Bible, and you find the sacrifice of children. You find it in Mayan cultures. You find it throughout a lot of primitive, primordial, bestial kinds of cultures, and we would be doing the same thing, just being our medically, we might have higher technology, but it would still be bestial behavior here. And I mean, certainly when you're talking about the kinds of abortions that this would allow, but it doesn't force it, it doesn't force the problem. This is the general problem. I was going to say that it doesn't force even open season on babies does not force a woman to get an abortion. But here we go back and we look at how many women have abortions, and statistically it seems to be that many women that have abortions regret those abortions later, because in many cases they're pressured into it by the male. Whether it could be, sometimes it's by the parents, mom and dad, that don't want their daughter to have a baby at 14 or 15 or 17, and whether it's to embarrass them or just to interfere with her life. The idea of a 14-year-old, I remember a few years ago, Michelle telling me about in the school district, there was an 11-year-old who got pregnant. That's horrific. But the issue becomes, abortion is the only thing that we allow in society where an innocent life gets executed for the decisions of other people. And that's fundamentally, another issue I have against abortion is no matter how you sell it, even in cases of rape or incest, the issue is an innocent party dies. It's, the person that's guilty, and that's a whole other conversation about how do we create a culture that limits and harshly punishes crimes against women's bodies. But that's that's also what needs to be looked at and confronted. What would the pornography business be without abortion? What would professional sports, male professional sports, be without abortion? What would Hollywood be, would the casting couch be without abortion? In all of these issues, we see that men are in positions of power. Rock and roll. I just saw that Steven Tyler's being sued by 2 women who claim that when they were in their early, young teenage years, they were sexually abused by Steven Tyler. The courts are going to decide that out. But, they dropped the statute of limitations for 50 years, going 50 years back. And so now he's having to pay the price of his youth. And we know infamously Jimmy Page had a relationship with a 14-year-old. Elvis Presley with Priscilla Presley. She was 14 years old. Jerry Lee Lewis. There's a whole history of these men with today we'd lock them up as pedophiles. As society turned a blind eye. But all of this male culture where men had power over women, whether it was physical power or just the power of influence, stardom, being starstruck. It's a very different thing. You don't see, I don't know if the rock band Heart had groupies. I know Led Zeppelin did, and so when you look at that kind of culture that we've created, how many instances do you have, professional athletes, actors, any man that's in a position of wealth and power and their ability to leverage that. You look at Britney Spears and her allegations against Justin Timberlake. I don't know if it's true or not, but her allegations were nonetheless that she would not have done this but for Justin. That goes to that whole point of how this issue of abortion, it seems to be, it's always told to the woman of, oh, this is in your best interest. What, you don't want people taking that right away from you. But the people that most benefit from it are like Jeffrey Epstein and his client list. You can go with whatever that is. But I mean, you look at these serial philanderers, they are empowered by abortion. It makes their life better. A pimp's life is a whole lot easier with abortion. So let's, look at the totality of the issue. And I think that's why I say, left to itself, the issue of abortion in most states is going to find itself in equilibrium. And at worst case scenario, there will always be fathers who love their daughters. There will always be mothers that love their daughters. There will always be husbands and boyfriends that love their daughters. There will be a way through this, but I don't see an extreme on the right. I don't see, you might have pastors pounding the pulpit saying abortion illegal at all stages, but most of the people in the congregation don't want it illegal at all stages. So as I said at the outset, reasonable minds are going to win out on this thing. You're going to have, whether it's 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 15 weeks, you're going to have some reasonable limitation on that. So, I don't foresee in any state where you're going to have an absolute ban, just because even Ireland has allows for legal abortion. Whether that's right or wrong, that's the thing with First Pres, right? First things at First Pres is getting you to think about, as a person of faith, when is it ever appropriate for, and again, as I shared, in the physical life of the mothers in jeopardy, that's always been a standard that's been applied. But beyond that, I think that's where it gets clear cut in terms of biblical interpretation. As far as church interpretation goes, you can't find until the modern era a point in the church's identity where it has justified a prophylactic approach to abortion, and I mean by that birth control. It's always been seen by the church that every child has worth and dignity. And in the case of, you take that worst case, the physical life of the mother endangered by her baby, in that particular case, what you still find is that baby is acknowledged, it is grieved for, and I think that is also something that has to be taken into account, is that it goes back to that fundamental question: when does a human being derive worth, value, identity, legal protection? All of those things, I think, matter. And the reality is that we keep playing. The only thing that limits where we say, the only reason we don't say at conception a baby has worth, value, dignity, the legal protection is semantics, because we want to have this wiggle room where we're not killing a baby, not a real baby. And yet we are, as I said earlier, we've got all the genetic potential, and we talk about every limitation, we're all growing and changing and developing, that's that whole issue of viability, is that, and we're finding, there's just so much we're finding from technology that speaks so beautifully to human worth and human life. And again, I am a pastor. I have had, I've had members go through all sorts of issues in life. I've counseled people about abortion before. And compassion is always there. Again, the important thing to talk about abortion is, in the vast majority of first-time abortion cases, we have the horror stories of women who have had multiple abortions, and there does seem to be a hardening of the self. The more someone has an abortion, the more likely they are to have one. But for most women that have had an abortion, it is a life-changing event. And I want to end with that because this is what often gets lost in this is fundamentally, we all know that it's a human being and it's taking a human life. Depending on the stage of pregnancy, I mean, it's easy if it's the first few weeks, first couple, 4 weeks. Some of that can be handled with pills and very, very just minimal disruption. But certainly you get even 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks into a pregnancy, and it's there. There's no denying the pregnancy and the development of the pregnancy within the woman. Not only changes to the baby, but also to her own body. And so we can play all the semantic games we want to, but at the end of the day, we know intuitively, the father, the mother, what occurred there in the termination. And we can justify it. And that's typically what does happen, is to say, well, you know what? We just weren't ready. Well, you know what? I just couldn't. And I, this is where I go back to Basil of Caesarea, and I find some genius there. And that is understanding that that pregnancy is, especially in our culture where we teach about sex, is that it's a recreational activity. It's fun. You might as well, and we're delaying marriage until late 20s, early 30s, kind of midway through a woman's reproductive cycle. If you look at a woman, it starts getting her period when she's 11, 12, 13 years old, and she's entering menopause in her 50s. Well, if a woman is not getting pregnant, choosing to get pregnant until late 20s, early 30s, that's midway through her fertility cycle. And that's not what nature, we talk about. We've created a world and a culture that is very unnatural. And I'm not saying it's all bad, by the way. I'm not arguing for 12-year-old pregnancy or 12-year-old marriages. What I am saying is that we are not listening to our biology. We're not listening to nature. We're not listening to life cycle. It used to be that, I've mentioned before, you look at biblical period, most women were getting engaged, betrothed at some time between 12 and 14. But then a period was going on where they were having to, the period was going on where there would be a betrothment period. You take the story in the Rachel and Jacob. There was a 7-year period there where she was engaged. She knew who her husband was going to be, but she needed time to develop, mature. So they, even in the Old Testament period, I'm not saying there weren't 12 or 13 or 14-year-olds getting pregnant, but in the majority of it, it was early. It would still be 14, 16 years old, 18 years old, but earlier in the fertility cycle. So, that's where we've created this culture where a girl, we're not teaching people to date for marriage. We're teaching people to date for fun. We've entered into our lexicon this idea of body count. How many people have a woman, how many people have a man, has men slept with? And rather than putting pressure on men to lower that body count, we're actually putting pressure on women to increase. You want to be cool, you want to be popular. And what we are, because we're treating sex like a swipe left, swipe right app, that we can just play with like a video game, unintended consequences are happening to something that's predictably reliable. If a man and a woman are having sex, even with birth control, but birth control can be really effective when it's done right. But if you're asking a 13 or 14-year-old to do birth control perfectly every time, right? That's how we get these unintended, but this is why we say unintended. But if a man and a woman are having sex and there's a possibility of sperm and egg meeting, life has a way. It's amazing how powerful, why those urges to reproduce are so powerful. It's why you have people like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell doing these horrifically self-destructive things. They're just, and politicians destroying themselves and their careers, their reputations over sex, is because it's a fundamentally powerful urge, because the whole idea is driving us to leave another generation behind. So that's why I say is we have this unnatural kind of life cycle that we've created, and we've detached ourselves. And so because of that, we're unprepared and caught off guard. And that puts people, that's when life gets messy. And now you've got, in best case scenario, you've got, a girl that grew up in a nice, good household, gone to church her whole life, a boy gone to church his whole life, and they genuinely love each other and like each other, and they're trying to do the best they can, but he's probably seen way too much pornography. She's seen some, and they've started to have sex, and now here's this good kids from a good family, and she's pregnant. And now life gets real, because the fact is it wasn't just about having fun. Sex is never just about having fun if you're heterosexual and you're fertile. It's always got the reproductive moment. That's one of the reasons, by the way, the church gets punished all the time for its views on unorthodox sexualities, including homosexuality. But that was one of the arguments that was being used, not moral perversion, or those were always there. Those will always be there. But one of the reasons was that it was fundamentally moving sex away from its biological rootedness, that in same-sex physical relationships, there is never the possibility of a pregnancy. And the teaching of the church was always that sex always ought to have that. Even you can go back into the 1950s, 1960s when birth control was coming on, and you look at Presbyterians, and we had some of these arguments about whether or not birth control should be available, and some of the cases, some of the arguments were, well, we only if it can be given to married couples, that way we can married people that are in positions can have a family the size they want to, but we don't want it going to single people. And I know that the television show from 10, 15 years ago, Mad Men, they showed some of that issues with these secretaries trying to get on birth control to be with their bosses. And goes back to my whole point here about who fundamentally gets value out of the abortion industry and the abortion cycle. Certainly it's the doctors, certainly it's Planned Parenthood and the biotech firms, certainly it's a lot of these men that are in positions of power and influence and wealth that put these women in this position. But like I said, it matters at the end of this that what you hear from me as pastor is like Basil said, one of the things that matters is thinking clearly at the front end. And how do we teach our young children? How do you teach your son? How do you teach your daughter? I have one of each. How do you teach them to make these decisions, to understand that there is no, if they're in a heterosexual relationship, they might have a culture that says sex is all about fun and recreation, and they might see these other examples out there, but fundamentally you cannot hide the fact that sex is designed, we call it a reproductive system for a reason. Fundamentally, babies are produced when men and women have sex together. And when it comes to these, and when we play games, and when we're not dating for marriage and we're not building lifelong partnerships that are conducive to a family being created, we have this messiness. And what I would say here, and what I have said in years past, is that this is where we test and really do test the depths of God's love for us in Jesus Christ. Forgiveness is that powerful. Is that in our repentance. And that's where, that's a tough word sometimes, but in our repentance, God forgives us of those decisions, and including abortion and pressuring a woman to have abortion, all those kinds of messy things that happen. Life gets messy and complicated, and God is not, it's what I preached yesterday when we looked at the Noah thing, that lament in chapter 8 where it says that God was not going to judge all of creation based on humanity, because the evil of humanity begins at youth. And it's a hard pill to swallow, that God understands that even among the best of us, we're capable of evil. And that is what he came. He didn't come to not just to only forgive us for speeding, going 55 and a 45. He didn't only come to forgive us when we yelled at our spouse or our child inappropriately. He didn't only come for us when we cheat on our taxes or we do, all these important but not soul-crushing decisions. God came to forgive us for the worst moments of our life. And that's important to understand. Basil made it clear that a woman having killing her baby in an abortion is not the same as like two men getting into a fight and one man killing another. It's categorically different. And partly because it's recognized as kind of an act against herself. It's her body. It's her natural biological processes unfolding here. So that's what I want to say. I mean, at the end of this issue of abortion is, regardless of what happens with issue 1, whether it passes or fails, it doesn't make anyone have to have an abortion. There are lots of options out there for adoption and teaching young kids how to be parents and all that kind of stuff. It's possible. It happens all the time. And for those who have had abortions or pushed people into having abortions or been there with a loved one who's had an abortion, there's always grace and mercy. That's the beauty of why we gather in Jesus' name is it's not that we're good, but Jesus is. And so let me encourage you with that. And because ultimately that's the transformative process of faith, is seeing not just your life through the compassionate lens of Jesus Christ, but seeing all life through the compassionate lens of Jesus Christ, from the worst to the best. So I'll leave you there. Have a good day. Have a good week. And I'll be back next week.